Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology and maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And we've been talking about older folks, and we have touched on death, and we're going to continue on that. Like I say, if you are born, you're going to die. If you're alive, you're going to die. If I'm the first person to break that news to you, sorry. I'm pretty sure I'm not. But anyway, we're going to get back into that. The sequence of events described in Little Women, we talked about that book last time. Like I said, someone in my family gave me that book, and I really liked it when I was 9. Is strikingly close to reality, as outlined by one of Alcott's biographers. In February, Lizzie began to fall rapidly from what Dr. Geist labeled consumption. And that basically, in the day, any lung disease, they labeled it consumption. So in the 1800s, you see all these folks dying from consumption, and, it could have been a lot of different things. But, whatever lung disease it was, they probably called it consumption. With aching heart, Louisa watched while her sister sewed or read or lay looking at the fire. Anna, Alcott's older sister, did the housekeeping so that Mother and Louisa could devote themselves to Lizzie. And I know when my sister was in the hospital, I was doing dishes and stuff, at the house for my mom, so she could be up there, with my sister, because that's important. The sad, quiet days stretched on in her room, and during endless nights, Louisa kindled the fire and watched her sister. And me and my fiance at the time would go up there every day and talk to her, and try and get her to give us a response there by the end, but of course she couldn't. So that was rough. Alcott herself wrote after her sister's death, "Our Lizzie is well at last. Not in this world, but another, where I hope she will find nothing but rest from her long suffering." And it is a relief if you watch someone suffer when they finally go, because, now they're at peace. They're not going through that anymore. And, I've thought about it since I have studied about brain structures and things, and thought that it might have been horrible for her, with her brain being under that much pressure. She might have been having really bad dreams or anything. So I've decided that, she is better off, where she's not her. Sorry, that was a telemarketer, don't you love it? But, there's no telling, and we'll, of course, never know what was going on in her mind while her brain was being essentially squished and her brainstem turned. It's horrible. So, I'm glad, I had prayed for the Lord to not take her, to let her live. If she was going to be a vegetable, I would take care of her, whatever. But, it might be really better that she did go. So, he knows best. I don't know best. I only know what would make me happy, but he knows best. So, it's better sometimes that he's in charge, Last Friday night, after suffering much all day, she asked to lie in Father's arms, and called us all about her holding our hands and smiling at us as she silently seemed to bid us goodbye. Now, when my sister was dying, the doctors called everybody in to come see her for the last time. We all knew, we called the family and everybody, and this is going to be the last time. Say goodbye. And, it was hard. It's hard to even think about it, really. But, I think it was an important thing for us, and the doctors know that, to be able to say goodbye before they turn off the machines. At midnight, she said, "Now I'm comfortable and so happy," and soon after became unconscious. We sat beside her while she quietly breathed her life away, opening her eyes to give us one beautiful look before they closed forever. And like I said, we've had, pets that have done that, and it's never easy. It's pretty sad. In Louisa May Alcott's time, death was a frequent, normal, expected event. sometimes welcomed as a peaceful end to suffering. And because they didn't have the medical care that we have now, there was a lot of suffering going on. We have morphine and Demerol and things like that now that they didn't have, back then. They might have still had morphine back then. I think that was pretty old drug, actually. It might have been around in the 18s or 17s, I don't know. But anyway, they didn't have the stuff that we have to calm people down. Caring for a dying person at home, as the Alcott family did, was a common experience, as it still is in many contemporary rural cultures. And I know my husband's mom tells a story about older relatives all dying at home and being born at home, and they lived in a rural community where they had one doctor, and they found out he didn't even finish medical school. He wasn't even a real doctor, but he was their doctor. But so that was just a common part of life where they lived, in the early part of this century even, or actually in the 1900s. There were still people doing this, and there might still be, out in the very rural backwoods areas where some folks have decided they don't participate in society. There are some folks still like that. They don't do modern society. Looking death in the eye, bit by bit, day by day, Alcott and her family absorbed an important truth, that dying is part of living. And it is. Like I said, if you're alive, you're going to die. If you were born, you're going to die. It's just a fact of life right there. Its meaning and impact are profoundly influenced by what people feel and do. And people's feelings and behavior are shaped by the time and place in which they live. And that's true. All you got to do is look at the different generations. My grandparents' generations thought one way about things. My parents another. Ours one more. Our kids another way. So, the time and place in which you live does impact how you think about things. And that could also include death. The many faces of death. And they actually had a movie called that, which was just gruesome. And I don't know why they would do that and why people would watch it. It was rented in our home. I did not rent it, but it was rented in the day, and I watched some of it, and I walked out of the room. I'm like, I'm not going to watch this. This is disgusting, and why would anybody do this? I'm not going to watch this. Death is a biological fact, but it also has social, cultural, historical, religious, legal, psychological, developmental, medical, and clinical aspects, which of course it does. And often these are deeply intertwined, because where you grow up, the time you grow up in, the culture you grow up in, all influences you. So, the way you think about death is also going to be, based on your experiences in life and what you were taught about death and what your culture says about death, and, maybe your religion. So, all these things are going to come into play on how you think about death. Although death and loss are universal experiences, they have a cultural context. Cultural and religious attitudes toward death and dying affect psychological and developmental aspects of death. Because, if your culture teaches you to think about death, that's how you're going to think about it. Whereas if you hear some other stuff and you think, well, maybe there's something to that. It depends on whether you're going to have hope for an afterlife or not. And that's going to kind of shape the way you feel about your death. How people of various ages face their own death and the deaths of those close to them. Death may mean one thing to an elderly Japanese Buddhist, imbued with teachings of accepting the inevitable, and another to a third-generation Japanese American youth who has grown up with a belief in directing one's own destiny. Like I say, here we have funeral planning. You can plan your own funeral, plan your own, burial and everything. And, I think that's not a bad thing, because that way it takes some of the burden off your survivors. But a lot of people, like when my mother, before she went, she had it all written down, how she wanted everything to be done. I ain't gonna go there, but that's a good thing for people to do, I think. Death is generally considered to be the cessation of bodily processes, and it is that biologically. When your bodily processes stop working, the heart stops working, the brain stops working, then that's it. You are physically gone. However, criteria for death have become more complex with the development of medical apparatus that can prolong basic signs of life. And notice they say signs of life. Like with my sister. They gave her drugs to keep her heart beating. They had her on a respirator to keep her breathing. And when there were no more signs of brain activity, they have to do 3 tests to make sure there's no brain activity. And when they had done that, my parents said, turn the machines off. She's gone. She's not in there anymore. We don't want to just leave that body breathing and everything. And so they did that, and it took her a little bit. And that's what the doctor said. She has a strong heart. Her heart was really strong, and it was fighting hard. But, after a while, it just stopped because, the brain that they were, like I said, they were keeping her heart going with drugs. So once those wore off, the brain was not giving the signals to it to keep going. So, she eventually passed. These medical developments have raised questions about whether or when life supports may be withheld or removed, and whose judgment should prevail. And I'm sure we all know that there's arguments over that. It's like there's some folks that believe keep them, alive as long as you can, and some folks who think I wouldn't want to be kept alive that way. Turn me off. Don't let them keep me alive. There are folks who have a DNR, do not resuscitate. So, everybody has different feelings on, whether they want to be prolonged or not. In some places, the claim of a right to die has led to laws either permitting or forbidding physicians to help a terminally ill person end a life that has become a burden. And I believe that you should do all that is medically necessary before you let a person go, to know that you did the best you could. Because there are folks who want to check out early, they don't want to go through anything. It's like, I believe that that's not, what God wants. I believe that He wants you to finish your life, in whatever way that ends up. That's what, I said, actually talking to somebody earlier, and I said, I think suicide is cheating. Like if you cheat and check out early, you might have to come back and do it again. That you don't get to cheat on the test. But, like I say, we'll know when we get there. Till then, we don't really know. We know what we believe because these are things we were taught. And, we learn other things. And, you can have a combined belief system. And a lot of people do. But again, I think we all remember Dr. Kevorkian, the guy named Dr. Death, who helps a lot of people die. Was that right? I don't know. Some people, are in a lot of pain, but excuse me, like I said, we have modern medicine that keep them from being in such pain. But if you get to the point where you're taking like a maximum dose, and there are folks, when hospice comes, a lot of times they will give you access to morphine, and they can't stop you from taking it all at once. That's what a person in my family had cancer, and that's what they said. What's to stop me from taking all this at once? And she goes, I can't stop you from taking it all at once. I could just hope you didn't, but so the option is on the table. a lot of times. So, yeah, no. But I don't think anyone should check out on their own accord. That's my opinion now. There's other people who think differently. I heard of a woman who said, hey, if you're in that much pain and you want to go, just go. And then, you'll have to deal with whatever happens. And I don't think that's good advice, in my opinion. But like I said, that's just my opinion. The cultural context. Customs concerning disposal and remembrance of the dead, transfer of possessions, and even expression of grief vary greatly from culture to culture, and often are governed by religious or legal prescriptions that reflect a society's view of what death is, and what happens afterward. Because, like I say, different cultures have different ideas of death. Whether, you're going on to the next plane of existence, you're going to heaven or wherever else, or if there's nothing after death, because a lot of people believe differently. So, that's certainly going to shape what happens. And now I'm mostly, Caucasian, so of course, there was the inheritance laws that had been passed down from, Europe forever, which is, the children usually get everything, and then brothers and sisters can come in if there's not any, and, by the old feudal rights of inheritance, the oldest would get everything, and then the others, good luck for y'all. But thankfully, it's not like that anymore. You split everything evenly, and that's how it should be, I believe. Because you grew up together and in the same house, and you had to put up with the same stuff together. So, I think that's fair. Cultural aspects of death include care of and behavior toward the dying and the dead, because even here in America, just like I say, visiting the nursing homes, you can see there are folks who are basically just ditched there. Nobody wants to deal with it. And that's a shame. You should have compassion and understanding for folks. If you have a loving heart, you should have compassion and understanding for folks. That's just the way it is, The setting where death usually takes place, and mourning customs and rituals from the all-night Irish wake. And again, like I say, a lot of people in different cultures, the death occurs at home. Here, it could be assisted living, it could be in a hospice. My husband's grandmother passed away in a hospice. So, it's just different for everybody, really. And, we've heard about Irish wakes, so I don't know that that's a, good party, but it might be, who knows. At which friends and family toast the memory of the dead person to the week-long Jewish Shiva, at which mourners vent their feelings and share memories of the deceased. And now usually there's a get-together here in the USA, and usually a lot of European countries. There's a get-together after the funeral. You go to somebody's house, and neighbors and everybody brought food, and people bring food, and you get food that can last you a week or so. And that's usually how we do it here. When my mom passed, I made videos of her and that we watched, at the house that we went to. So, and there were pictures passed around, and that's kind of how we usually do it here, is we have a little remembrance of the person, and then everybody just kind of disperses usually and goes on with their life. Some cultural conventions, such as flying a flag at half-mast after the death of a public figure, are codified in law. So, in some countries, there's even laws about what happens when somebody dies. In Malayan society, as in many other pre-literate societies, death was seen as a gradual transition. So they felt like, you don't just suddenly leave the body when everything stops. You just slowly float out and go away. So, A body was at first given only provisional burial. So, they would just precursory bury the thing in a shallow grave, and it would be dug up. I think I told about the story about, in one culture where they dig the body up every year and clean it up, change the clothes and everything, and, not something I would like. I don't know that that's very sanitary or, something I would want to see. I want to remember my loved one the way they were, not how they look when they're decaying. That's just not something I personally would like. So, that might just be me. Survivors continued to perform mourning rites until the body decayed to the point where the soul was believed to have left it and to have been admitted into the spiritual realm. So they thought it took a certain amount of time. They didn't realize that once your body processes stop, that's it. And now I think it's 7 minutes or whatever in your brain that you're surviving after everything, the heart and everything is stopped, that your brain continues to work for, it's either 7 or 10 minutes, I don't remember. But anyway, I'm not going to Google that right now. So, that was their belief, is that it took some time to get there. In ancient Romania, warriors went laughing to their graves in the expectation of meeting Zalmoxis, their supreme god. And that's probably a good way to go, is you're laughing like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited, I get to go, see the god. And I think that's a good way to go. Like I said, I've known people who I worked at a nursing home, and there's been some time like people like, I saw an angel, and then that person would be gone in the next day or two, and you're like, whoo. Like I said, my own mother saw an angel, and then it wasn't but a few months later she passed away. So I think there's something to that stuff, and like I say, I can only hope that when I'm ready to go, it's a happy occasion. In ancient Greece, bodies of heroes were publicly burned as a sign of honor. And we all know about the Viking funerals that they talk about, and they say now that wasn't even real. They didn't put them on the ship and send them out, because then that would put the body out, and the body would be in there, and they didn't do that. They put them up on a hill and stuff. So, lore sometimes gets out of control. Public cremation is still practiced by Hindus in India and Nepal. And that's something that, I have actually witnessed on television. I was watching a documentary about the area, and that's something that I saw, and the family was all gathered around. And now I have heard, I certainly don't know, but I have heard that the smell is bad. But if that's something that you're used to and that's what's done, then it probably doesn't bother you. But again, I don't know. We might smell great when we're roasting. We might smell like roast beef or pork. I don't know. But anyway, I don't know that I would want to be near and see such a thing. But that is their culture, and that's the way they believe that they should be honoring their dead. By contrast, cremation is prohibited under Orthodox Jewish law in the belief that the dead will rise again for a last judgment and the chance for eternal life. So they believe the body needs to be intact. Now, Christians don't necessarily believe that. There was the, good gosh, Jesus was talking about where the bones were raised and turned back into people. And he's like, God can raise, a person from, your pinky or your hair or whatever. So we believe that no matter how you're disposed of, in the end, God's going to raise you up. Even if you're ashes, he's going to raise them ashes up, like he did the dry bones. And you're going to come back to a body and get a new body. So, like I say, even different faiths have different views on how you're supposed to dispose of a body. In Japan, religious rituals encourage survivors to maintain contact with the deceased. So, you're supposed to still talk to the person over there, Yeah, and some people do that here. They talk to their dead folks, and I honestly don't see anything wrong with that. As long as you're just talking to them. Families keep an altar in the home dedicated to their ancestors. They talk to their dead loved ones and offer them food or cigars. Now, see, that's where we differ, because to me, if you have the altar and your offerings, and that's too close to praying, and the only person in my belief system you're supposed to pray to is God, in the name of Jesus. So that's where we differ there. But if that's their culture and that's what they're doing, and I'm in their culture or in their home, it's not my place to try to proselytize them in their own home. That's a good way to get your butt kicked out of the door pretty quick. So, excuse me, we have to be tolerant of other people's belief systems when we're in their sphere. I had someone kind of fuss at me about going to the Muslim dinner, and I was like, we're in their sphere. I was invited as a guest, so I'm certainly not going to come at them. So yeah, sorry if you don't like it. In Gambia, the dead are considered part of the community. So everybody would grieve the dead. And that would be nice, but here that'd be a bit much. Among Native Americans, the Hopi fear the spirits of the dead and try to forget a deceased person as quickly as possible. Now, I know in other parts of Native America, it's not like that. They were honored, elevated, and they remembered them. So even in different subcultures of a culture, things differ. Muslims in Egypt show grief through expression of deep sorrow. And we all naturally have deep sorrow. We just deal with it differently. Some show it, some joke about stuff, some just try to be stoic. That's usually how I go. And everybody expresses their sorrow differently. Muslims in Bali are encouraged to suppress sadness. See, even in the same religion, there are different subcultures that believe differently. To laugh and to be joyful. So they kind of taking the Irish look on that. To be joyful about the whole deal. All these varied customs and practices help people deal with death and bereavement through well understood cultural meanings that provide a stable anchor amid the turbulence of loss. And that's the whole goal there, is that they have some sort of way they deal with it so that you can deal with it. And then that is a good thing to have, because otherwise you might be devastated by the loss of someone, and sometimes we just are. There's no way around that, because a person that was a big part of our life is now suddenly gone, and that leaves a big hole. So having these practices, cultural and religious practices, helps us to deal with the fact that this person is gone. So death is a sequence of events, usually. Now there are sudden deaths, which take people by surprise and like, oh my gosh. My mom's was sudden. She did have a heart attack a few months before, but she seemed to be doing better. She was out going out again and going to restaurants and stuff, so we were kind of surprised when she just kind of dropped. But like I said, my sister's was gradual, and we had to watch that. But for most people, the person does get sick, and then they gradually start losing mobility and abilities, and then the health declines even further, and then they pass away. So usually it is a sequence of events that is leading you to the death of this person. So sometimes you have time to prepare and be ready for when this thing is going to happen, because it's going to happen. And sometimes you have no warning. So, excuse me. If you have some warning, it's easier to deal with than if not. So, if you are having problems with grief, then, maybe you should go talk to a counselor or a therapist, and work through those, because it's only going to, help you to come to terms with, the loss of this person in your life. And I know my grandma was my big supporter. My mom's mom, she loved me more than anybody else. And when she left, I felt that hole. The hole was there. And, I had nobody that I could just pick the phone up and say things to that I knew would care and would understand. So, that was a big loss in my life when I lost her. Excuse me. My nose has been running today. I've been sneezing, trying to get a summer cold from hot, cold. But, sometimes we're taken aback when someone suddenly goes, and sometimes we have time to deal with it. But no matter how it happens, death is a loss, and you need to allow yourself the time to grieve, the process of grieving, because if you push it back, we all know what happens when we push back, don't we? Eventually it comes forward. You can only push back so long for your brain's like, you know what? It's time to deal with this now. We're going to deal with this now. And sometimes the timing is not great on its part. It just waits till it thinks you're ready to deal with this. So, like I say, I hope that I'm going to leave you there, and I hope that helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program around the world. And if you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.